They thought humiliating the new black girl at prom would be just another joke, until the cameras caught what happened when she finally hit back. But the punch wasn't what shocked them, the truth was. The morning sun spilled across Riverside High like it had been waiting for a stage. Everything gleamed, the marble floors, the glass doors, even the gold trim on the lockers. It wasn't just a school. It was a kingdom built for the privileged, the flawless, the chosen. And into that kingdom walked a girl who didn't belong. Nia Washington moved quietly through the front gate, her Detroit jacket faded, frayed at the cuffs, a little too real for this place. Around her, voices whispered, sharp as glass. Perfume hung heavy in the air. Girls laughed, their manicured nails tapping against cell phones. Boys smirked like they already owned the hallways. Nia didn't look up. She didn't have to. She could feel every stare, the curiosity, the judgment, the unspoken question, who let her in here? She reached the glass doors and paused. For a second, she caught her reflection. A black girl, jaw tight, eyes steady. The kind of look that didn't ask for permission to exist. Behind her, a group of students passed, their laughter carrying just a little too loud. First day, one girl asked, not waiting for an answer. Nia nodded once. Cool, the girl said, but her eyes flicked up and down like she was scanning a barcode. When Nia pushed through the doors, the sound changed. It was quieter now, like even the building was holding its breath. Lockers lined the hall like trophies, polished until you could see your face in them. Posters about charity galas and Ivy League prep programs covered every inch of the walls. It was beautiful, almost painfully so, but beauty had a way of hiding rot. She made it 10 steps before someone stepped into her path. Tyler Mitchell. He didn't need to introduce himself. His confidence walked in 3 seconds before he did. Designer blazer. White smile. That look kids have when they've never heard the word no. He looked at her shoes, her jacket, her hair. Then he smiled, the kind that wasn't meant to be kind. Careful, he said, his voice smooth, practiced. Floors here are slippery, for your kind. For a heartbeat, the hallway froze. The words hung there, delicate and poisonous. A few students laughed under their breath. Others looked away. The marble beneath her feet might as well have cracked. Nia didn't move. She didn't blink. Just stared at him with that still, cold calm, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't give them what they want. Tyler's grin faltered, only for a second, but that second was enough. She stepped aside, brushed past him, and kept walking. Behind her, whispers followed like shadows. Detroit, someone muttered. She'll be gone in a week. Nia walked faster. The sound of her sneakers echoed against the walls, steady and sure. Every step was a reminder, she'd walked harder streets than this, faced louder hate than this. This was just a different ring. At the end of the hall, she stopped again. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting long lines across the floor. She stood in the middle of it, feeling the weight of the silence. Somewhere behind her, Tyler's voice floated again, softer this time. Don't take it personal, new girl. It's just Riverside. Nia turned her head slightly, not enough to face him, just enough for her voice to carry back through the light. Funny thing about marble floors, she said quietly. They shine brightest right before you slip. And with that, she walked on. The bell rang, sharp and clean. Around her, the kingdom came alive again, doors opening, heels clicking, laughter returning. But for one fleeting moment, the perfect world of Riverside High had cracked, just a hairline fracture, invisible to everyone except the girl from Detroit who saw it coming. That afternoon, the halls of Riverside were quiet, washed in the lazy glow of after-class sunlight. Most students had already left for tennis practice or debate club. Nia walked alone, her footsteps echoing through the gym wing. That's when she heard it, thump, thump, thump. A rhythm too familiar to ignore. She froze. The sound came from behind the glass doors of the physical education room. A heavy bag swinging. Someone hitting it with just enough force to make the chain rattle. For anyone else, it was background noise. For Nia Washington, it was the sound of home. The sound of survival. Detroit came rushing back in pieces, dusty floors, sweat on skin, and the sharp scent of leather gloves that never quite dried. The Rodriguez Boxing Club wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint, broken lights, the old radio that only played static between beats. But for a 12-year-old girl who'd lost too much too soon, it was a church. A place where every punch was a prayer. Again, Coach Rodriguez said, his gravel voice echoing through the gym. Nia, younger, smaller, sweat dripping down her cheek, threw a sloppy jab. Wrong, he barked. Not like that. You're fighting the bag, not yourself. He walked over, large hands steadying her stance. Feet apart. Shoulders loose. Look at the bag like it's trying to take something from you. Nia frowned, reset, threw another punch. This time it landed solid. The bag shuddered. Better, he said. But remember something, Washington. Real fighters know, sometimes walking away is the hardest punch. She blinked, confused. Walking away? He nodded. Anyone can swing when they're angry. But strength, real strength, is control. You fight because you must, not because you can. He turned away, leaving her with the words hanging like incense. Nia stared at the bag, her reflection faint in the leather. Control. That word would stay with her longer than any lesson about footwork or jabs. Years later, it was still there, buried under every calm breath. The sound of the chain clinking in the Riverside gym pulled her back to now. She peeked inside. 2 boys were fooling around, taking turns punching the bag with bad form and worse jokes. It wasn't training. It was performance. They laughed at their own wild swings. Nia watched quietly for a moment, then tied her shoelaces tighter, the motion deliberate, the kind Coach Rodriguez used to call, the ritual before the storm. She walked on. But her posture changed. Her shoulders squared, steps more grounded, like the floor beneath her had become a ring again. For the first time since stepping foot in Riverside, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like a fighter in disguise. Outside, the late sun was starting to dip, painting the courtyard in a wash of orange. Tyler Mitchell and his friends stood by their cars, laughing, the picture of privilege and boredom. They didn't see her pass. Didn't notice the girl who'd once broken knuckles on heavy bags harder than their egos. And maybe that was her advantage. They'd never see her coming. That night, as Nia unpacked in her small rented apartment, she found the old gloves at the bottom of her box. The laces were worn, the leather faded. She held them up to the light. The memories hit like body shots, grit, pain, resilience, the sound of Detroit rain on the gym roof. She slipped her hands inside, felt the familiar weight, and smiled softly. Still fits, she whispered. The next morning, she walked into Riverside with that same quiet fire burning beneath the surface. No loud music, no crowd, no fight bell. Just a heartbeat steady as a drum. She didn't need to prove anything yet. She just needed them to underestimate her. Because they would. They always did. And when they did, they'd learn the truth Coach Rodriguez had drilled into her bones, that strength isn't noise. It's patience sharpened into thunder. That fire didn't come from anger. It came from knowing exactly who she was. And if Riverside thought they could dim that, they were about to find out what happens when you try to bury something that was never meant to stay quiet. The sound hit first, a burst of chaos slicing through the calm morning hum of Riverside High. Come on, Thompson. Fight back. The words bounced down the hallway like an alarm bell. Nia froze mid-step, her stomach tightening. She didn't know who Thompson was yet, but she knew that tone. The kind that tasted like mockery wrapped in laughter. When she turned the corner, the scene unfolded like a bad movie playing on repeat. A ring of students, phones held high, faces lit by cruelty and curiosity. In the middle of it, a tall, skinny black boy with glasses was pinned against the lockers by 3 white boys. His books lay scattered across the floor, one of them stomped under a sneaker, Advanced Calculus. The cover torn, pages grinding into the tile. The kid's hands were up in surrender, his voice lost in the noise. One of the bullies shoved him again. "What's wrong, genius? Can't solve this equation?" The crowd laughed. That hollow, echoing sound that never reached the eyes. Nia's pulse quickened. She'd seen that look before, the helpless flinch, the forced silence, the cameras waiting for the moment humiliation turned entertaining. She didn't think. She moved. The crowd parted slightly, murmurs rising as they noticed her. "Who's that?" someone whispered. She shoved through the last few kids and stepped into the circle. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Back off him." Tyler Mitchell turned first, his perfect hair catching the light. Of course it was him. His smirk widened like he'd been waiting for this. "Oh, look," he said. "Detroit's finest." The other boys chuckled. "Didn't know you two knew each other." "We don't," Nia said flatly. "Now move." Tyler cocked his head, amusement flickering across his face. "This is Riverside, sweetheart. We don't take complaints from your kind." The words landed like a slap, but Nia didn't blink. She didn't give him that power. Around them, the crowd shifted, hungry for the next line. Someone whispered, "Is she gonna hit him?" Tyler stepped closer, testing her silence. "Or what?" he asked softly. "You gonna throw a punch? Teach me some Detroit manners." Nia's hand stayed loose at her sides, but her body shifted almost imperceptibly, weight balanced, eyes locked, shoulders square. The same stance she'd taken 100 times in front of a heavy bag. "You don't want that," she said, her voice steady. Tyler laughed. "Oh, I think I do." Connor, the redhead, puffed his chest beside him. "Come on, man, she's all talk." The hallway buzzed. Phones lifted higher. Everyone was waiting for the explosion, the proof that the quiet girl was exactly what they expected her to be, angry, violent, unhinged. But Nia didn't give them the show. She just looked at Tyler, long enough for the smile on his face to falter. Her eyes didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't apologize. They just stared straight through him, calm and cold. The kind of calm that makes people realize they're standing on thin ice. For a moment, the hallway went silent. Even the laughter felt out of place now, swallowed by that stillness. Tyler shifted his weight, searching for something to say. "Relax," he muttered finally, his tone cracking just enough to betray him. "We were just messing around." He glanced back at his crew. "Right, boys?" Connor and Brad exchanged glances, then nodded hesitantly. The crowd murmured, disappointed that the show had ended before it got good. Tyler forced a smirk, backing away like it was his idea. "See you around, Thompson. You too, Detroit." Then he turned, leading his group down the hall, their laughter thinner now, less sure. One by one, the phones lowered. The audience dispersed, hungry for the next bit of gossip. When it was quiet again, Nia bent down to help the boy gather his books. His glasses were cracked, his hands shaking. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded but didn't look up. "They've been doing this for a while," he murmured. "I thought I was the only one." Nia handed him the calculus book. "You're not alone anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a second something like relief crossed his face. But behind it, fear still lingered. Because they both knew this wasn't over. As they walked down the hall together, whispers trailed behind them like ghosts. And somewhere out of sight, Tyler leaned against a locker, watching. The smirk had returned, but his eyes had changed, colder now, calculating. For the first time, someone had made him hesitate. And that scared him more than he'd ever admit. Nia could feel it too, the invisible line that had just been drawn between them. She hadn't thrown a punch. She hadn't needed to. The look in her eyes had done more damage than any fist could. That was the first blow. And everyone who saw it felt it, even if they didn't understand why. The next morning, Riverside High looked brighter than ever. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, bouncing off the polished lockers until everything gleamed too perfectly, too clean to be real. The air smelled like money and perfume, laughter echoing down the halls, sharp, rehearsed, hollow. Nia walked beside Jamal, both quiet, carrying the kind of silence that comes from knowing peace doesn't last. They were almost at class when the voices came. Well, Tyler's smooth drawl slid through the hallway like oil on water. He stood with Connor and Brad, leaning against the lockers, phones already recording. The red light on the camera app blinked like an eye that never closed. Jamal stiffened. Nia's steps slowed. "Morning, Detroit," Tyler said, flashing that white-toothed grin that never reached his eyes. "Hope you found suitable accommodations. I know housing can be challenging for people like you." Connor chuckled under his breath. "Maybe you can teach Jamal some urban culture, huh?" Brad snorted. "Yeah, man, drop a beat for us or something." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it sliced. Each word felt carefully chosen to hurt, to humiliate, to remind them exactly where they stood in this kingdom. Nia felt her fists tighten. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, each thump matching the urge to end this right there. Tyler stepped closer, camera still rolling. "Smile for the camera," he said. Riverside's diversity program at its finest. The crowd that had started to form wasn't laughing now, but they weren't stepping in either. Phones came up like shields, ready to capture another moment they could replay later, safe behind screens. Jamal tried to keep his voice steady. "Put that away, man." "Public space," Tyler replied smoothly. "You should be grateful. We're giving you representation." Connor leaned forward. "Yeah, maybe rap something. It's in your DNA, right?" The words hung heavy. The smirks widened. The air turned suffocating. Nia's jaw locked. For a second, she stopped breathing. Everything Coach Rodriguez ever said about control started slipping away. She could already see it, her fist landing, his smirk cracking, the phone catching it all. And she knew exactly how it would play out. They'd call her angry, dangerous, another stereotype in motion. Tyler's voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "Come on, show us that Detroit spirit. Everyone's watching." Jamal's hand shot out, gripping her wrist just as her muscles tensed. "Don't," he whispered. His voice trembled, not from fear of them, but fear of what would happen if she gave them what they wanted. "They want the video," he said. "Not the truth." The words hit harder than any insult. Nia exhaled, the air shaky leaving her lungs. Around them, laughter crackled again, softer this time, but meaner. The kind of laughter that knows it's untouchable. A teacher walked by, Mr. Harrison, physics, eyes flicking toward the scene. For a heartbeat, Nia thought he'd stop. He didn't. He adjusted his tie, avoided her gaze, and kept walking. That silence was louder than Tyler's words. Louder than the laughter. Louder than the sound of her pulse fighting to stay calm. Tyler smirked again, sensing victory. "See," he said quietly. "Even the teachers get it. Don't take it so personal." The camera clicked off. The show was over. The audience started to drift, pretending they hadn't been watching. Jamal released her wrist slowly. "You okay?" he asked. Nia nodded, but her eyes stayed locked on the hallway ahead, on the endless line of perfect white lockers. "Yeah," she said. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Inside, something had shifted. Something quiet and dangerous. As they walked toward class, her reflection glided alongside her in the polished surface of the lockers. The girl in the glass didn't look like someone holding back anymore. She looked like someone waiting. Waiting for the moment the storm would break. The bell rang, shrill and metallic. Students hurried past, all pretending not to notice her. For them, it was just another morning. For Nia Washington, it was the moment she understood something brutal and true: here at Riverside, justice wasn't blind, it was bought. And everyone else had already sold. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream, crystal chandeliers spilling light across marble floors, gold drapes swaying as if they breathed, and a live band playing the kind of music that made everything feel expensive. Outside, luxury cars lined the hotel entrance, each one carrying students dressed like royalty. Inside, Riverside High was celebrating itself, and for one night, the world pretended there was no hierarchy, no whispers, no divide. Nia Washington stood at the top of the grand staircase, her deep purple gown catching every flicker of light. The color wasn't random, it was bold, regal, a quiet declaration that she didn't need to fit in to stand out. Beside her, Jamal adjusted his bow tie for the 5th time, trying to hide his nerves. "Just one night to be normal," he muttered. Nia smiled. "Normal's overrated." Together they stepped into the glow, and just like that, the room shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The music seemed to soften around the edges. 2 black students at Riverside's prom, walking tall through a sea of glitter and privilege, that alone was enough to draw every eye. Some smiles were polite. Others weren't. Tyler Mitchell watched from the far side of the room, drink in hand, surrounded by Connor, Brad, and a few of their girlfriends who clung to his every laugh. His tuxedo looked tailored for the spotlight, but his eyes weren't on the stage or the band. They were on Nia. "Let's make sure tonight," he said under his breath, "everyone remembers their place." Connor chuckled. "You really gonna start something here, man?" Tyler smirked. "Not start. Finish." Across the room, Jamal tried to act casual, greeting classmates with the easy grace of someone who'd learned how to smile through disrespect. But Nia could feel it, the weight of the stairs, the invisible line separating them from everyone else. For a while, though, she let it go. She danced. The band's rhythm pulsed through the floor, the kind that made the chandeliers tremble. Jamal spun her once, and for a fleeting second, she forgot about Riverside, about Tyler, about all of it. She laughed. Really laughed. And that sound carried further than she realized. Tyler heard it. His jaw tightened. To him, that laugh was defiance. To her, it was freedom. The night unfolded like a movie, bad DJ jokes, too sweet punch, glittering lights reflecting off sequin dresses. Jamal whispered something that made Nia laugh again, and people started to notice not the difference in their skin, but the ease between them. It wasn't part of the script Riverside expected. It was better. But somewhere between the dance floor and the dessert table, she saw Tyler watching again. His smile was too calm, too practiced, the kind that hit something sharp underneath. He leaned into Connor, whispering, and they both laughed in that way predators laugh before the hunt. Nia's instincts, honed in gyms and alleys and fights she never chose, stirred like an echo in her chest. Something was coming. She didn't know what yet, but she could feel it in the rhythm of the music, the slight hesitation, the false peace before the drop. Jamal noticed her expression change. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" She looked out over the glowing ballroom, the chandeliers, the endless mirrors reflecting perfection. "About how funny it is," she said softly. "Everyone's pretending this place is a fairy tale." Jamal followed her gaze, then nodded slowly. "And you don't believe in fairy tales?" Nia's eyes glimmered with something between calm and challenge. "Not in this kingdom." Then she smiled, small but real. But that's okay. Queens don't need permission to dance. The song changed. The crowd cheered. Tyler raised his glass and whispered to his crew, "Showtime." Across the room, Nia adjusted the strap of her gown, took a slow breath, and lifted her chin. Whatever game they were planning, she wasn't afraid. She'd already lived through worse than anything Riverside could throw at her. And for the first time, it wasn't anger she felt rising, it was clarity. Because somewhere deep down, she knew, this wasn't just prom night. It was the last round. The ballroom lights sparkled brighter, but to her, they looked like floodlights over a ring. Every eye on her. Every whisper a countdown. The band swelled, couples twirled, and the storm she'd been holding back for months finally began to gather, silent and inevitable, behind her steady, unshaken smile. The ballroom pulsed with light and noise, a blur of gold and laughter and bass that shook the chandeliers. At the punch table, crystal glasses clinked and the reflection of the chandeliers rippled across the liquid surface like broken stars. Nia stood there alone for a moment, her breath calm, her back straight, trying to enjoy the rare quiet between songs. Then a voice slid through the music, smooth, practiced, poisonous. "That dress really brings out your exotic features." Tyler Mitchell. He moved closer, his cologne heavy, his smirk rehearsed. "You should take that as a compliment," he said, lowering his voice. "Guys like me don't usually hand those out." Nia didn't flinch. "You heard me the first time," she said evenly. "I said no." The music didn't stop, but the air shifted. People nearby glanced over. Someone lifted their phone. Then another. Tyler smiled wider, sensing the eyes, feeding off them. "Don't be like that," he murmured, leaning in just enough to make her skin crawl. "Smile for the camera." Jamal appeared out of nowhere, his voice cutting sharp through the noise. She said, "Don't touch her." For a second, the music swallowed his words, but the look in his eyes said everything. Tyler's grin froze. "Relax, hero," he sneered. "We're just talking." "You call that talking?" Jamal shot back. The air cracked with tension. Connor and Brad drifted over from the dance floor, circling like backup dancers for a fight no one had practiced. Brad reached for Nia's phone sitting on the edge of the table. "What's this?" he taunted. "You recording us now?" Nia's hand darted out, but he was faster. He snatched the phone, laughing, holding it just out of reach. "Careful," he said. "Wouldn't want to break." He didn't finish the sentence. Because in the space between one breath and the next, everything changed. The noise of the ballroom faded to a low hum, her heartbeat steady and deep like the sound of a drum. Coach Rodriguez's voice echoed somewhere inside her head, "Real fighters know, sometimes walking away is the hardest punch." But this wasn't one of those times. Brad shifted his weight, still grinning, and that was enough. Her right shoulder rolled forward, hips turning, the motion fluid, automatic, years of training compressed into a single heartbeat. The punch landed clean. Not wild, not angry, precise. Controlled. Brad folded. The sound of air leaving his body was louder than the music. The crystal bowl of punch trembled on the table. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "Oh my God," someone screamed. Phones shot up. Tyler lunged forward, but Jamal stepped in, body already remembering every movement Nia had taught him in the gym weeks ago when they joked about self-defense. Tyler's fist swung wide, Jamal ducked low, pivoted, and drove his palm up into Tyler's shoulder. It wasn't much, but it was enough to throw him off balance. Connor shouted, reaching to grab Nia, but she sidestepped, the hem of her gown catching the light as she moved. The crowd split in half, some backing away in shock, others pressing closer with their phones raised, hungry for footage. The band stopped playing. The music died mid-beat, leaving only the sound of breathing, heavy and ragged, and the whir of cameras recording everything. Brad groaned on the floor, clutching his stomach. Tyler stumbled, one hand on the punch table, his perfect composure shattered. His eyes found Nia's, and for the first time, there was no arrogance there. Only rage and disbelief. "You're done," he hissed, his voice shaking. "You hear me?" No," Nia said quietly. "You are." Her tone was calm, colder than marble. The words hit harder than the punch. Someone's phone slipped from their hands and clattered to the ground, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then the first flash went off, camera light piercing the quiet like lightning. Then another. Within seconds, the room was alive again, but different now. The laughter was gone. The cheers that rose weren't for Tyler. They were for her. She dropped him, someone shouted, half shocked, half thrilled. And just like that, the story began to spread. Jamal stood beside her, chest heaving, eyes wide. "You okay?" he asked. Nia nodded once. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm fine." But inside, it wasn't fine, it was freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when you stop asking permission to exist. Security rushed in, teachers shouting, trying to piece together what had happened, but the truth was already out there. Dozens of phones had captured it. Every insult, every touch, every second before the fall. Tyler tried to protest, to twist the story back in his favor, but his voice was lost under the wave of whispers. The footage was proof now. The untouchable prince of Riverside wasn't untouchable anymore. As they led the boys out, Nia stood still in the middle of the ballroom, the lights above casting her in a halo of glass and gold. She could feel everyone's eyes on her again, but this time, they weren't watching to judge. They were watching because they'd just seen something they couldn't unsee. Strength, not violence. Control, not chaos. The kind of power that doesn't scream, it silences. The kind that doesn't destroy, it reveals. In the quiet that followed, Nia looked down at her hands. Steady. Calm. No regret, no fear. Just clarity. Around her, the chandeliers flickered, and for the first time since she'd walked into Riverside High, she wasn't standing on someone else's floor. She was standing on her own. By the next morning, Riverside High had changed. Not the marble floors or the gold-trimmed hallways, those were still spotless, but the silence was different. It wasn't the usual hush of privilege. It was the kind that follows an earthquake, when everyone's still counting the cracks. The video had gone everywhere. Phones, group chats, social feeds. The headline on the school paper read, #JusticeAtRiverside. Someone had even printed the photo of Tyler on his knees, mid-collapse, and pinned it to a locker before a teacher quietly took it down. The Mitchell family tried to spin it, of course. Statements, excuses, lawyers. A misunderstanding, they said. Edited footage. But the cameras had been too many, the angles too clear. There was no saving him from the truth. Tyler Mitchell, Riverside's golden boy, was suspended by noon. An investigation was opened. The same teachers who once looked away now spoke in low, careful tones, as if saying too much might expose how long they'd been silent. And through it all, Nia Washington walked down the hall like a storm that had finally passed. No one dared meet her eyes. Some whispered. Some smiled faintly when they thought she couldn't see. But she didn't need their validation. She wasn't walking for them. She was walking because she'd earned the right to move through this place without apology. Jamal caught up to her by the lockers, waving a thin white envelope. His grin was the first real smile she'd seen all morning. "Harvard," he said, voice soft but shaking with disbelief. "Full ride." Nia's face broke into a quiet smile. "Told you you'd make it." He laughed, glancing down the hallway that had once felt too long, too heavy. "We made it." She nodded. They didn't need to say more. Behind them, the walls of Riverside held their secrets no longer. The truth was out, and truth, once freed, doesn't go back into the dark. When the final bell rang, Nia stayed behind. The room was empty, sunlight pouring through the windows, dust floating like gold in the air. She sat at her desk, opened the drawer, and there they were, the old gloves from Detroit. Worn leather, frayed laces, still smelling faintly of sweat and memory. She ran her fingers along the stitching, then slipped one glove halfway onto her hand. It still fit. She closed her fist slowly, feeling the weight, the history, the discipline in every fiber. Then she took it off, folded it gently, and placed it back in the drawer. For the first time, she realized she didn't need the gloves anymore. What she'd fought for wasn't about fists or fights. It was about standing tall when everyone wanted her small. As she stood to leave, her reflection caught the light in the window, stronger now, calmer, the quiet fire still burning beneath. Outside, a student passed wearing a hoodie with the hashtag printed across the back. Justice at Riverside. The corners of Nia's mouth lifted. The storm had passed, but its echo would stay. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The voiceover closed like a breath of truth. Turns out, standing tall hits harder than any punch. Then the hallway faded to quiet again, leaving only the sound of footsteps, steady, unhurried, unafraid. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.